Welcome to Agenda 2063 TV show, the only show in Ghana, the region, the continent, telling you authentic stories about Africa's integration. Happy to have you join us, Mr. Jason Theede from the International Organization for Migration, in one of our special editions, speaking to IOM staff, senior IOM staff across the continent. So thank you. And once again, my name is E.K. Bensa Jr., your host for the show. Mr. Jason Theede, nice to have you join us for this interview. If you can kindly tell us a little bit about yourself, then we'll proceed directly to the questions. Thank you very much.
Sounds great. Thanks, Emmanuel, very much for having us come and speak with you on, this really important topic. It's really nice to see IOM being invited and discussing on Agenda 2063. Very, very important topic for us, of course, and for the continent and our countries. Myself, I'm Jason Theede. I'm the Senior Specialist for Labor Mobility and Human Development with the IOM Regional Office for Southern Africa, and I'm based in Pretoria, South Africa. I'm originally from Canada, so I'm a Canadian, but I've been abroad for 20 years, so I'm very much a migrant. And 15 of those years has been based in Africa, so truly a part of my heart. My kids were born here, so I got a couple of hooks to Africa for sure.
Okay, excellent.
Well, thanks a lot.
All right, thank you. So I guess we can quickly move on this. I think by now, a lot of people have an idea what IOM is, what it does. IOM is the UN's agency responsible for migration, ensuring that migrants have safe, orderly passage. But there's a lot more that IOM does as well. And what people don't really understand is now that we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, this conversation about the trade migration nexus, which is specifically what you are going to talk to us about today. Can you kindly unpack that for us? What is this trade migration nexus in the context of IOM's work that we've been hearing about?
Sure. It links a lot to, we discuss, I'll broaden it out a little bit. We approach it from a mainstreaming. If you look at the Global Compact on Migration and you look at the way migration is being discussed, the GCM and IOM very much putting forward a whole of government, whole of society approach. We know that migration, this topic, can't be really tackled with one thematic area or sector alone, one government or whatnot. And so it's really about the interlinkages between migration and development. Similarly, it's the interlinkages between trade and migration, or how this links to the broader mobility agenda. And this is really something I'm going to get into, with our talk today, is around mobility. So really it's about how does trade influence migration or mobility, and vice versa. How does mobility and migration influence or impact upon trade? And so, ultimately what we're seeing is that there's been a lot of discussions on these different sectors, trade sector, labor mobility, immigration. For what I'm trying to say, and what I think is important moving forward, is how do we look at the connections? Because if we tackle this in our silos, which is the way that we're looking at it now, we're not going to be able to really unlock, one, the mobility agenda that's ultimately necessary, migration, that's ultimately necessary to have the realizations of free movement for Africa, and how that then links squarely with the free trade agenda. And so this is something that, this is what we're trying to put across, is trying to bring these connections, the actors, the sectors together, because the way IOM is looking at it is this is where we're missing out, is we're still approaching the trade aspect from somewhat a purely trade focus. And what we're trying to say is to really realize free trade, you have to have all these other components that support this process. And that's the nexus between migration and trade. Their interlinkages, their influences on each other, and understanding the different aspects of what this all comprises.
And in fact, this is one question I asked your colleague the last week, is that when you look at the Agenda 2063 conversation or project, you see that freedom of movement is one of the flagship projects, the 14 or 15 flagship projects of Agenda 2063. Yet, in the 7 aspirations which are usually focused on a lot compared to the SDGs, there's usually a difference, distinction made between what are the 7 aspirations of Agenda 2063 as compared to the SDGs. When you look at the aspirations, there's nothing explicitly about migration, even though it's buried in the conversation. In your view, is it too late to help change the conversation, to help remind people about how important migrants are to the conversation on Agenda 2063 and about trade that you're talking about? Because when you look at the aspirations, it may be very easy to forget that migrants are not part of the whole picture of the aspirations. It's like assumed that Africans want a better Africa we want, but there's no conversation really explicitly about migrants there. And I know IOM has been trying to change that narrative, but what do you think we need to do a lot better to make sure that part and parcel of that conversation comes together, especially now that we have AFTA?
So yeah, I mean, migrants are one, but that's more of the downstream side of it. These are the people, these are the movements, right? That again, bringing it up and looking at the frameworks, like you're saying, we have, to me, there's pillar frameworks of Agenda 2063. It is the Free Movement Protocol. It's the AFCFTA itself. There's the migration policy framework that was put across. These 3 pillars are key for us. And this is where it's not necessarily about the migrant. I can get at the topic of the migrant, but it's about movement. Okay. It's about, and what do we look at from a migrant? So that's the other thing, is unpack. What is a migrant? Well, it can mean many different things, right? There is standard definitions. But if we're looking at integration, we're also talking about mobile populations. We're talking about truck drivers that move the goods across. They're constituted, they're a part of that, right? Yes. Migrants themselves, they are those coming in. Those are your traders, your small scale cross-border traders. They're migrants. You're talking about the labor mobility agenda of Africa. What are we trying to do in Africa? Get skills moving, get cooperation moving. That is all built in to Agenda 2063 and what we're moving. So for me, it's not just about the issue of a migrant, what we would see as, the individual moving from country A to country B, mostly for economic reasons. That's there. But what we have to do is understand the complexity of what mobility and migration and all the different individuals and types of movements that are part and parcel and contributing to this agenda. And so, to be honest, I don't think we're too late. What we need to do is educate. We need to inform. What we have to, but what's hard for Africa is we tend to continue to see migration in a negative light. And for us, what we're trying to do is flip this to say, without migration, or again, I bring in the aspect of mobility, which is much broader than migration. Migration is that process. Mobility, as we talked, comprises many different things. Without that being adequately addressed, we're not going to achieve the vision, because ultimately we created free movement as a sister protocol to free trade. So what, and then we see the difficulty, because we see goods, particularly COVID-19, we saw a lot of agreement to allow goods moving across borders. That is a very easy discussion. But the mode 4 discussion, the services discussion, the population mobility discussion, it's quite stagnant, in my opinion. So why is that? How do we then match these levels? Because ultimately they do have to be mutually beneficial to move it forward. So I don't think it's too late, but I think we have to have people, regulators, practitioners, general public understand, what this is all about, what integration means, not the scary side of it, the positive ends of it, and how that directly is linked to the migration and mobility narrative and agenda that we're trying to have in Africa.
That's a very, very important and nuanced response you've given, because I'm beginning to feel now after a number of interviews with your colleagues that if we flip the switch and started talking about migration, changing migration with movement, we probably would get a lot more positive responses and reactions to it than we have been. Because even when you look at the African Migration Report, which came out back in October 2020, that was launched in 2020, such a fabulous publication. But when you look at a specific chapter like Chapter 7, which speaks to the issue of securitization, where member states feel that if they open up their borders too much, you're going to have so-called migrants flooding in, taking over jobs, social security, and all the benefits that are supposed to be accrued to the citizens. And if I'm just thinking that in a perfect world, if we change that title to African Mobility Report, maybe we may have received more positive responses, because people will then begin to think, there's nothing wrong with moving. We Africans like to move a lot. The continent likes to move a lot. Everyone likes to move a lot. And movement comes with a lot of innovation and different dynamics that help add to development. So I think, as you say, there is some hope there. There's optimism. But in the meantime, in your view, what do development practitioners need to quickly do to make sure that we begin to shy away from these negative associations that come with the word migrant?
Yeah, thanks, man. This is the migrant narrative we have to take a look at. And I think it's, again, comes down to understanding what does free movement mean? If I look at ECOWAS in your region, ECOWAS has been doing free movement since the 70s and quite well, to be honest with you, and there's a lot to learn. So different regions have different perspectives. What's important is to truly understand what constitutes free movement. It doesn't mean an opening, a free flood, open border where everybody's going to come in. No, what we would say is, one, what is it? 90-day visa on arrival. But that doesn't mean that you then are not supposed to do your proper checks, due diligence. That is absolutely necessary. And to be honest with you, having a free movement regime provides a lot of opportunities, but it's then upon the member state to make sure that those checks and balances for security and all that are beefed up and are actually working. So again, I think sometimes there is a lot of scary discourse around what free movement actually means. And so I think what practitioners and regulators need to do is understand what it is. This is where the IOM, we've been requested, to come and actually brief Parliament about what is free movement, why is it important, and the thing is that I question too, and this is something when I work with my member states, I work at all the levels, I work at AU level, I work at the region and with the countries, and then I think to myself, I've been learning, I've been working. We sign these very progressive, inspirational documents and frameworks continentally. We do the same thing regionally. That means we agree. But why is it then when we come to national level, and this is my perspective, why then is everything more defensive? So for us it's for regulators to, before going and sign, I think it's great. I'm a proponent. I completely support. But what I'm seeing is that there's been signatures and responsibilities placed on member states that they now are not able to maneuver at the national level, be it political issues, be it not able to then, align different policies, to the needs of the continent or the region. And I am seeing this disconnect that's happening between this very proactive continental drive for Pan-Africanism, truly, to then sitting back, and going, at the national level, I don't know if I'm going to do this. So for me, they need to understand the issues. They need to look at the roadblocks, the opportunities, but they actually have to start breaking apart this, like I said, the siloed approach. This is what's happening in governments. So for me, trade, and this is how IOM and others can support, where trade, they need to come in and be able to uniquely link with immigration, home affairs, looking at visas and all that facilitation, the labor agenda. I always think, why is it when I go into, because when I come into a trade discussion, I start talking about labor. You can see it's apples and oranges, right? Tradespeople are saying, oh, what are you talking people movement for? I just want to talk about moving the goods. But the agendas are together. And so labor on the labor mobility agenda should be discussing with the services and trade agenda. So these are some of the things that breaking it down and seeing how we then bring systemic coherence, right? Not just the policy coherence, but how we then bring the systems together to kind of unlock this whole aspect of mobility, free movement, and really dispel the myths that are there, because there is a lot of myths. And ultimately, we want to change this dialogue. We know migrants are vulnerable. We get that. But we also realize, and what should be put across is that mobility, migrants, and this whole agenda on the African continent is a key development enabler and contributor to Agenda 2063.
And whilst we focus on the issue of Agenda 2063, I think the other important conversation is on probably beginning to help people understand the freedom of movement protocol. Like you said, ECOWAS is one of the regions that does as well. But as you will well know as well, East Africa is also one of the regions that is probably a little bit more advanced as far as harmonization of policies on free movement is concerned. Why, what in my view, if we're looking at radical solutions, is it now time for an East-West Africa conversation, given how well they've been doing in their respective regions, as ambassadors of this freedom of movement protocol? Because I think I saw somewhere back last year or so online that even legislators of the East African Legislative Assembly, the regional legislature for East Africa Community, and ECOWAS Parliament were supposed to come together. I don't know what happened to that. But you look at these two regions, you know, Ugandans are going to Tanzania. Yeah, there are challenges and all that, but they do it so very well. And we also have that experience here in West Africa. Can these two regions not do something special with IOM to help hammer home that important point that, look, it's time, you know, it's time we made movements, no pun intended, on freedom of movement protocol? Because if you're doing it so well in the region, at the regional level, why are you stalling at the continental level? There's going to be a lot more to it. And even my own country of Ghana, which hosts AFTA Secretariat, is not even a signatory. Okay, it's a signatory, but it has not ratified the freedom of movement protocol. And you're wondering why are we in that situation? So, but by way of radical solutions, what do you think this is something that can happen, where you know, West and East Africa come together to really support IOM on this freedom of movement protocol?
I'm actually quite surprised, to be honest, just to say that Ghana hasn't. I've been to your country many a time, mostly doing diaspora engagement and the progressive nature the government is putting across. So I'm quite surprised by that. To answer your question, absolutely. This is something we've been having a discussion on, and not just from those two sides. I think those two sides, the two regions, can come together, and I think we do need champions. We need we need individuals, and we need countries, because we need to look at how to bring the political capital to this discussion. And so I think there's a lot that each can learn and champion, but that's something that I've been discussing between our offices here in Southern Africa and the office in East Africa on an exchange, on bringing the RECs together. So I would love, we have quite a progressive labor mobility agenda in SADC. They're starting. So I was thinking we can discuss that, where they then bring to the SADC a discussion around free movement. And as you probably know, SADC is not necessarily supporting free movement. It's more the facilitation of movement of persons, protocol. It's a little bit different, nonetheless, but I do feel that there is a need for this discussion. But I would also say there's a link too. There is these bilateral, but I would think that there is also a tripartite group. There's the SADC EAC COMESA group as well, where free movement is a part. And so I think we need to utilize these mechanisms, correct, and bring, REX and champion member states into the stream, and not just to support IOM, to be honest with you. We're there to support you, the member states. So I think it's how do we bring a discourse that's member state, that's driven by governments, that we can support, to really address some of the misconceptions, fears, and really have a discourse on how we're going to take this agenda forward. COVID-19 for me, Emmanuel, gives us a perfect opportunity. Mobility stopped. So my question is, do we still agree as a continent to what we've signed on to? Moving now that mobility is opening up, do we still agree that integration is the way to go? Free movement is the way to go. That's another. I think we have to double down on that discussion and have a common approach moving forward.
Fantastic. At this stage, let me quickly find out from those who are in the room whether there are any questions. Do we have any questions from some of our listeners? Anais, Mehdi. Oh, I think Audrey just joined us. Maybe you have some points that you'd like to raise. Audrey,
sorry, I've joined a little bit late. Have I missed most of it?
No, we are question time. So you are free to ask a question. And with a kind introduction, please.
Let me gather my thoughts first.
Okay.
I've literally just joined.
And tell us who you are, please.
Okay, so I'm Audrey Baini. I'm the Executive Director of Women of Africa Network. So a subsidiary of APN.
Yeah.
So
After
our main
Policy
interest,
Network.
After Policy Network, yes.
Yeah.
So our main interest is in women, ensuring that they will succeed under AFTA. So we do a lot of advocacy work with the Secretariat and capacity building programs, and looking at partnerships, looking at investments in women's businesses. In a nutshell, really, just working with women entrepreneurs to ensure that they will excel under the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So that's really in a nutshell.
Okay, great. So your question, your thoughts?
At this moment, I don't have a question in mind. I don't have a question in mind at the moment. So please come back to me on that one.
Oh, okay. Let me help you. We're talking about the trade migration nexus. We're talking about the critical element of freedom of movement, what we need to quickly do. I think the last question was seeking to find out from Mr. Jason Theede what we need to do about bringing greater partnerships, such as bringing the REX together. And he mentioned something about bringing COMESA, EAC, and SADC together. SADC has a comparative advantage on labor mobility, right, Jason? Which is something that maybe that could be brought to bear to East Africa that does freedom of movement very well. Or maybe we could have that conversation with ECOWAS. So it's about exchanging what they do very well. And of course, this affects women, because women doing cross-border trade, they are the ones who are most vulnerable. They get harassed at the borders, they'll be demanded visas. In West Africa, where we think we are doing free movement very well, even harassment takes place, let alone REX that are only facilitating freedom of movement, such as SADC. So in your view, as someone focused on looking at women, cross-border trade entrepreneurs, maybe you have a question that can help you better understand where IOM and Jason is coming on freedom of movement and how that can help support women as well.
Like you said, one of the key issues, one of the main concerns is the harassment and the issues that women face at borders, particularly when it comes to movement across these borders and the challenges that they come across, and the fact that there isn't that that signature, there isn't that the freedom of movement protocol is not yet in place, and it seems that the different member states are dragging their feet of it. It is a concern, especially where women are concerned. You did mention that the different RECs have their own freedom of movement there's freedom of movement between the
Regimes.
different races.
Yeah.
Exactly. How would that impact? How is that going to, how does that influence, because it doesn't seem to have done much to encourage the different member states who seem to be happy with the movement agreement with the Rex. Why not with the AFTA protocol? What's the difference between the AFTA protocol signing that and signing up to the Rex? Why is there a difference in those two areas? Because it's the same member states who have agreed to the freedom of movement in the Rex. So why not with AFTA? Where's the disconnect? Why is there an issue there?
Thanks, Audrey. I think if I can, Emmanuel, this comes back to what we were talking about a little earlier, right?
Yeah.
And seeing that there is a lot of progressive leanings at continental and regional level, right? And so they come into these regional meetings and they all want to come together and they agree to these provisions. But what we're seeing is very defensive posturing at the national level. And that's something I've also am starting to question of why is it that we are agreeing, promising at the end of the day to do this, but then when we come back in country, we're not able to then see the realization of this. We're not able to ratify the proper protocol or the convention. Why? So this is something that we need to begin unpacking, you know what I mean, at the national level. We shouldn't be approaching continental discussions without having a very good sense of our context, our position, and what this means. And so there's a lot of homework that needs to happen as we enter into these, because what's happening now is we have these ratifications, we have movement, but this is where AFCFTA, AUC, and the Rex are saying, great, but then when it comes to actual doing stuff with it, we're not moving at all. And so there is this disconnect we have to look at. Emmanuel, if I could, one of the things on the women's side, and thanks, Audrey, I mean, I can, as you were going in, some of the angles here is we know migration, there's an increased feminization of migration across borders on the continent. Women migrants are moving alone. It's no longer those traditional in families, looking for gainful employment, all whatnot. And so there's a real focus on making sure that these provisions, these agreements align and bring gender dynamics into this, the unique, needs and aspirations of women. We know that UNDP, UN Women have been putting, and I don't know if you're involved in this, they have been putting across a women within the AFCFTA, making sure that women traders are recognized. And so they're actually developing strategies along these lines to bring women more firmly into the AFCFTA discussions. And also you mentioned small scale cross-border trade, essential, and it's something we've been doing a lot. We actually have working, I'm a facilitator and trainer on a COMESA program where we're actually discussing small scale cross-border trade with the mere focus of making member states understand why formalizing small-scale cross-border trade is so very important, why protecting small-scale cross-border traders, recognizing their contributions, reducing tariffs and issues at the border, like streamlining process to get around harassment and whatnot. These are all very critical, and I can actually say that there's a lot of work being done in that space, and specifically I'm working together with COMESA on piloting a five module workshop with government officials, not just it's with trade, home affairs, across the board, labor. We bring them all together, foreign affairs, and we discuss small scale cross-border trade, because what we're failing to recognize is the real significant contribution that small scale cross-border traders provide. And interesting enough, 60 to 70% of all small scale cross-border traders are women. And so we're seeing not just the economics of this, we're also seeing the relevance of this in aspects of food security, right? We saw that it was the small scale cross-border traders, women in particular, that helped in the COVID-19 response. Because they were able to allow for some of this trading to go on, it helped with some of the food security issues in the communities, in the countries. So I would say this aspect of women and trade and whatnot, very much on the front agenda, and something that there are a number of actors looking to make sure that this is addressed appropriately as we move forward to programming under free trade or at cross-border or whatnot. So thanks a lot for that question. I hope I gave a little bit extra to you.
You did. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to look a little bit more into the program of the UNDP that you mentioned with regards to women in cross-border trade. So I'll read up a little bit more on that one. But thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Audrey. And as we begin to wind down the show, we just got a couple of minutes. Maybe one last thing that we can find out from you, Jason, is the role of the media. In just a minute or two, what do you think? Are you satisfied with the way the media has approached the conversation on migration and free movement, or is there a lot more that needs to be done? And if so, what needs to be done very quickly to gain traction, to ensure that we tap in quickly to the momentum that AFTA seems to be moving along?
Thanks a lot. We work, of course, we live in a world where media is pushed quite quickly. I think there's an absolutely central role. Some of my background is coming from communications, but am I satisfied? No. Ultimately, the narrative needs to change. We need to not necessarily go after the story, whatever that sensational story may be. We need to double down on what is factual information. A lot of times, if I'm sitting here in South Africa, a lot of things that are pushed through the media, we have evidence to counter this, but this is not what's being put into the mainstream vis-a-vis migrants taking jobs and these types of things. So I think there's a lot that we do. What are we doing about it? We're including media within workshops. There's actually something to it now. We have a migration media center that was just opened up in Bel Air in Ireland, actually, and we just hosted the very first training. So we're inviting media houses from across the world that are reporting upon migration to come and join this, to have a better sense of what this topic is and how to go about. Media plays an essential role in shaping societal narrative. And at the end, we do realize and recognize the difficulties that migration brings, but ultimately we need to then provide a very holistic and factual picture. And that's something that I don't see coming out a lot. I see a lot of chasing of the story. And in particular, I may not be African, but as I said in the opening, I've been in Africa a long time. And this what is pervasive in the media as far as African migration is not the story of African migration. It is not the flight to Europe, but that is what we see. What we need to recognize of the story of migration in Africa is the intra-African mobility. Over 80% of the mobility of Africans are across borders. That's about integration. That's Agenda 2063. That's the story we should be putting across.
Excellent. I think on that note, Jason, thank you so very much. And I think we will probably be in touch with you on some of the different aspects of the conversation that you gave us, like the COMESA and so on. I think they're very critical things that we can pick up from you. If you don't mind, we'd do that after the interview. But we want to say thank you very, very much for taking time out of your very, very busy schedule, because I know you have a lot of things every single day that you need to do, and you know, taking time out 30 minutes is quite a bit of time. So thank you very much. We hope all those who followed us have you know, gained a lot more information now and begun to understand why we need to have the conversation on trade, migration, and also that nexus, why it needs to come out. So thank you once again, Jason Theede from International Organization for Migration, Southern African Office, Regional Office in Pretoria. Great to have you, and we hope to speak to you another time. Have yourself a great day. And to all of those who joined us, thank you. My name is E.K. Benson Jr. Thank you for following Agenda 2063 TV shows edition today. Have yourselves a great day. We'll speak to you next time. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Emmanuel.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much.